Welcome to In the Zone and Construction Executives Live, brought to you by U.S. Construction Zone, bringing you strategies for success with construction innovators and change makers, including In the Zone peer-nominated national award winners. Here's your host, Jeremy Owens.
Welcome back to Construction Executives Live. I'm your host, Jeremy Owens, owner and founder of U.S. Construction Zone and 3 Generations Improvements out in sunny Northern California. We have another great show for you today. In talking to a lot of people around the country, both in my industry, which I do siding, windows, decking, but also in other aspects of construction. It's kind of strange. I'm feeling a little bit of like volatility going on. Some people are as busy as ever, and others are telling me there's a little bit of slowdown they're feeling. So wherever you're at right now, I think it's a very important time for us to be together as a community, whether you're joining a group or you have a business coach or going to conferences, whatever that might look like for you. I think it's important to do so, because what you hear in the news is always happening in your individual business. And so you really need to surround yourself with your peers to help you be more efficient in your business. Secondly, it's very important to surround yourself with technology that's going to make you more efficient, especially in terms of data. Most of the technology out there is about, hey, you already have a bunch of data in your business. How about we use it to make decisions in our business, as opposed to maybe the old school way, the way I was brought up is which way is the wind blowing? And then let's make a decision and change just for change's sake. So really, it's a cool time in the construction industry because we have so many great tools coming at us fast and furious. And really, it's time now just to take a pause and start introducing some of those technology tools to your business and see where it takes you. One of those tools, we're sponsored by the great team at Build 12, build12.com. Great CRM, automate your revenue, your business into a revenue generating machine. Check out build12.com. Mention Les, mention me, and you'll get a free demo. And he's a great person if you want to talk about a coach as well. Also sponsored by Builder Pay Pro. BuilderPayPro.com is the construction payment platform that saves you time, money, and gets you paid fast. Pay 0% credit card processing fees, accept ACH payments, and utilize a state-of-the-art invoice tool that integrates with QuickBooks. Visit BuilderPayPro.com for a free demo. Today's show is called Material Volatility, Building in Uncertain Times. In today's volatile market, construction companies face unprecedented challenges as supply chain disruptions and tariff uncertainties force rapid adaptation. This episode explores how the industry is navigating material shortages, price fluctuations, and regulatory shifts to maintain project viability. We also are going to examine how breaking down data silos and implementing AI-driven solutions creates a competitive advantage in this uncertain landscape. Discover the substantial benefits of centralized project information, from reducing costly delays to enhancing decision-making capabilities and improving budget control across all stakeholders. We are joined today by Trevor Schick with a background steeped in technology and building expertise. Trevor brings over 30 years of operating experience across multiple industries to his roles as CEO of Slate. Most recently, Trevor served as the COO of real estate operations for Amherst Holdings, where he held all operations, technology, and marketing for the single-family rental and bungalow direct-to-consumer platforms. This role included significantly growing the platform while creating operating leverage across the acquisitions, construction, leasing, and sales teams. Prior to Amherst, Trevor held the role of president of materials and renovations at Katerra, as well as holding senior level supply chain roles at other large global organizations such as Hewlett-Packard, Motorola, EMC, and Apple. Please help me welcome Trevor Schick. Trevor, thank you for being on the show.
Absolutely. Good to be here.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about your kind of upbringing in construction. That's a lot of different hats you've worn over the years. So tell me a little bit how you got there.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I originally came from the high tech industry side of the world, so grew up in the supply chain. That's kind of been my background most of my career. You kind of listed off a bunch of the companies that are out there. I was there in the early days of Apple. For those who remember the iPod, I was on the original iPod team long ago before the iPhone. So it's kind of one of my fun facts out there of getting that to market. But I spent 20 years in that industry. Moving up, my last role was with Hewlett Packard Enterprise, running the global supply chain for them. And after that, I went over to Katera, where came in really to bring the material supply chain piece into the business. The idea was we'd become very efficient on how we run supply chains in the high tech industry for the companies you talked about. How do we take some of those learnings and kind of expedite them into the construction industry, where instead of going through multiple layers of distribution, you went and worked directly with the suppliers. That gives you better quality, gives you better cost, and much better visibility in the supply chain. So that kind of got me into the real estate side of things, which was exciting. And then as I went over to Amherst, which is a single family rental platform, spent a lot of time where that was more of, I'll call it a factory and a business. We did everything from buying the home. We then renovated the home. We then took that renovation, put it into lease up, and then we operated as a single family rental platform. And really we treated that like a factory. The idea being is if one of those constraints was wrong, the whole supply chain fell apart. And so again, bringing this mentality that I really grew up with in the high tech industry and applying that to a very different industry that really got me into the real estate side of the business. And all that was based on software that we put together and the algorithms that kind of linked all those pieces together to make it successful. And then, as you mentioned, I left Amherst and went over to Onyx Holdings for a while, which is a single family home builder, bringing over some of that technology. And it's actually interesting that I went to Slate because their AI technology was the best I saw in the market, started working with them. So I became a customer of Slate. And then after a little while, I got to know the board and the founders, and they asked me to come over and run the company. And so about a year and a half ago, I got over to Slate. So as you said, very background, but kind of brings a lot of the pieces we're going to talk together about today to the table, because I've been dealing with the supply chain my whole life in different businesses.
Yeah. So what is that? I mean, obviously going from tech to construction, right? I mean, two very different industries. What do you what do you like about the construction? Obviously, I'm a fierce, loyal construction guy that, I'm always kind of, supporting us however I can. But what did you find the biggest difference was from that tech side to go into construction?
Yeah, there's a couple things I'd highlight. One is, in the tech side, I'm a relationship guy, right? And the relationships that we had with our suppliers was critical. And that was much more on the material side of things. Obviously, you had factories that built it, not the on-site. And so the materials piece to me was kind of the draw-in for me. What I really had to learn was the importance of people in the construction industry, right? They are the most critical asset in this industry. So we can go solve the material problems. I knew how to do all that. Yeah. Coming into this industry, and the people in the field that aren't, it's not the people that sit in the big office and write the checks. It's the guys in the field that make projects successful. And so how do we enable them to be more successful? Because everyone talks about AI and how it's taking away jobs, especially in construction. Those jobs are always going to be there, right? It's how do we get them the right tools to be able to go attack their daily problems and spend their time on the right things. But you're always going to need those people out there. So it's real kind of getting that mind shift change from just materials is the world, which is kind of how I grew up, to really that critical asset that we have in this business, which is the people in the field. The other piece I'd say is this: it surprised me at first how disaggregated the whole value chain is, right? Again, I come from a place where, if I was running the supply chain, I knew all of my suppliers, I knew the CEOs of those companies. And so when there was allocations, when there was issues, I could go right to them. In the construction industry, it's much more of a general contractor working with the sub. The sub is working with, the distributor. The distributor is working with the materials guys. And so, the data gets so lost as it goes through that long chain of people that you really don't know. So somebody would say to me when I got here is like, are your materials going to arrive on time? And I'm like, I hope so. Where in my previous world, I knew exactly what was happening. If I needed to hop on a plane and go to Korea to buy memory, I could hop on it and know I could go solve that. And so that disaggregation in this was the other piece that really kind of struck me. And it's part of what we were attacking at Onyx and really trying to then with Slate, as I've gotten here, try to help people with that problem.
Got it. Yeah. And with the many roles you've kind of had, as you're kind of jumped around in the construction industry a little bit, what part of the industry has you most inspired or excited for the future?
Yeah. So of course I'm going to say what I do now. But I think it is, the technology that's coming out right now, projects are getting more complex. We all know that the data being created, it is 2.5 quadrillion bytes of data, which these numbers are just crazy numbers, right? And it says, on a daily basis in the construction industry. So it's not that there's a lack of data, there's a lack of tools to be able to take that data, harness it, and be able to give you actionable things to go do, which is kind of step one. And then really, and this is where the AI piece comes in, and we'll talk about this more, is, then how do you take it beyond that to the next step, which is not only point out what the problem is, but come back and start giving the solutions. And again, it's not the machine taking over the world, but it is definitely getting to the point where, we're able to highlight what are your biggest impacts. Here's some recommendations what to do. And then jointly with the human side of it, come up with those right actions to go do. And that to me, I think is the exciting part of where, AI, but the software tools that, Slate is bringing to the table in kind of our space. But there's a lot of other great companies out there doing some good work in this spot with AI as well for construction.
Yeah, definitely. And with your previous experience with the supply chain, what did we learn about the COVID pandemic in terms of our vulnerability? And have we made any improvements, changes there, or are we still super vulnerable?
Yeah, so my argument would be is we're still vulnerable. We always will be. If I go back, there's always been supply chain disruptions, right? Yeah. I always used to joke with people. I ran a global supply chain. I had 70 factories across the world, 10,000 people in an organization. Every day I woke up and I was just like, what is my problem of the day, right? And it was all about supply chain disruption. So they're always there. I think what COVID taught us is that I can solve them when they're kind of popping up, right? It's a little bit like whack-a-mole. I hate to oversimplify it, but it's like, here's my problem. I need to go address that. We get that one fixed, and you can usually solve them. What happened with COVID is when all the factories closed down at the same time, it was just unprecedented, right? It was just like, I couldn't go just put all my time on these one or two big issues. It was across the board. It was the same people fighting for those allocations. And it's where I think we started to see the vulnerability, especially in construction with the data, right? We couldn't figure out where materials were. Were they on a boat? Who are they allocated to when they got there? Just because of this multi-layer supply chain. And so, COVID definitely brought that to the table. I do think, my thing for the supply chain executives out there, and I'm old, so it doesn't matter as much to me, but the guys coming up, is that, you were suddenly the guys on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, right? Which they never were before. It was just operations was expected to just make it happen, especially in tech. It was all about engineering up front and the sales guys. And in the background, the operations guys you flew under the radar, you worked hard, and you got this thing across. With COVID, it was the first time this came to the top. And so I actually think companies then started investing more, both in people and in the software to go manage this. And so I think there has been improvements. I don't want to minimize the improvements, but from a vulnerability perspective, there's always going to be some vulnerability there. The goal on this is to keep knocking it down. Again, I think there's a lot of tools that are coming out that help highlight that earlier, because that to me was always my surprise in the construction industry is everything was very reactive, right? Most of this materials that's coming from Asia is on a boat. So 3 months before it gets here, you should know exactly what's happening. Right. But that information doesn't flow all the way to the subcontractor, the general contractor, and then the guy at the end of the day who's paying the bills, which is the developer. Right. He's this, doesn't know what's happening. And so I think there's been a lot of work to try to get that piece better understood so that when there is an issue, people can see it. But, the more we can get closer to that. And if I go back to my time at Onyx, it was exactly doing that. How do you go and just build up that relationship straight with the supplier rather than doing it to kind of distribution and the multiple layers on that? So more work to be done, but I think there's been good progress since COVID. But again, if the whole world shut down again, I can guarantee we're going to go through some of the same issues.
For sure.
We just you'll never solve that.
Yeah. So what's kind of creating the uncertainty today? I mean, obviously, we could kind of point to the tariffs, but whatever it is, like I said in the opening, I'm getting a lot of feedback from my peers that, some are really in a weird, uncertain time. Maybe that's economy driven. Maybe that's the tariff thing, wondering what's going to happen with material prices. What are you seeing in today's market right now?
Yeah, and so I'm going to take a step back. Hopefully, you'll let me. I mean, I've dealt with tariffs my whole career, right? I mean, there's nothing new about it. If I wanted to go sell servers in India, I needed to build a factory in India, right?
Yeah.
Because the tariffs to move product into India was so high, regardless of where I brought it from. And so Brazil was similar, right? So in my career, I've dealt with tariffs the whole time. What the difference is, and why I think there's so much fluctuations right now, is those were pretty certain. Right. I knew that, hey, this was the tariff impact. If I went and built this factory, I could go resolve that. And I had time to put that in, because you can't do that kind of stuff overnight. I think the uncertainty of the tariffs right now is probably one of the biggest issues in kind of what, where people feel this thing is going right now, because the one thing I can guarantee you is they're going to be different next week than they were today. And everyone woke up this morning and, hey, maybe we're going to cut China tariffs in half, right?
Yeah.
All this just, so I sit here and I have a small HVAC business that we're building up, and it's just, just starting to ramp. And I sit with them, and I sat with them this morning and just said, hold all the materials in China, right? Because I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm better off letting them sit there and potentially air freighting them over later and paying a premium than ever importing them to the US at 145% tariff and running into the impact of that. Right. And so I think people like me are sitting in offices all day just saying, if I knew what the real impact was, I could go make plans. I could go start mitigating that.
Yeah.
Without knowing where it's going to be. And 1 month, 2 months, 3 months from now is what's putting a lot of that uncertainty into the system. And so to your point, it's, tariffs were there last year. They were there the year before. They were obviously different limits. The uncertainty around them is what's really driving a lot of the fluctuations in the business. And I think to the point of, there's kind of short-term, midterm, long-term impacts, just like everything in the world, right? Short-term buildings that are far and away and already have their materials purchased and sitting there, they're going to continue to just plow these things out, right? Because they have the certainty in it. I kind of have the midterm guys that haven't brought all the materials in yet. And so now suddenly they're underwriting, and the subcontractors can't absorb all that if these tariffs stay where they're at. And so they're going to need to push on that cost onto the builder. And then suddenly these guys are having to underwrite some of the projects. And I think that's where you're seeing some of the slowdowns right now, which is, I need to understand this, because I can't take a cost increase like that and still underwrite to the same level. And then you have the lenders and some others in the value chain looking and saying, well, wait a minute, I'm not cutting that next check until I understand what this true impact is. And so, midterm, I think you're seeing some people slowing down some and starting to just wait to see, again, a little bit of what happens. And it goes to my uncertainty comment. Actually, my biggest concern is the longer term, where you're seeing people not start projects, right? We're not going to feel the impact of that for a while, because it takes a while to start doing the land work and getting the project started. But people that are sitting there saying, my underwrite that worked last month, I'm about to start this project. Hold, let's go redo the underwrite on this and see whether we can still make the the profits we need to go get this thing going. And so I do believe there's kind of, that's probably, as you're talking to people, I talk to people all the time. Yeah. You're getting a different feel from different people depending where they are in the value chain. I think it kind of depends on what one of those scenarios they're sitting in right now.
Yeah. And is there the other thing I hear a lot, and I can definitely feel this in my own business, is price increases, right? I mean, the cost of everything. I mean, obviously I'm in California, so I get that double fold with everything, but the cost of materials, like every year we get 2 increases from our manufacturers. It seems like every year, and they'll cite something in the economy, right? It'll be fuel surcharge, it'll be tariffs, uncertainty, but we don't get decreases. So we're all just kind of wondering, like, how sustainable is this? If we look back 2-3 years, we're up 20% in costs. It's like, how can we continue to do this, especially because incomes of our people who are selling to are not increasing at that same rate?
Yeah, and that's where I was going to go. And I'm closer to the residential side of construction, just because it's kind of where I'm at. I mean, we all know the numbers, right? And you'll see different ones out there. Between 4 and 6 million homes short in the U.S. right now, right? Yeah. And the problem is the affordability side of it. At the end of the day, we can't, the average income can afford a home that's about $220,000 to $230,000, and the average home being built right now is a $400,000+ home. And so, the supply demand in the different areas is off to solve that problem. And to your point, at the way that it's escalating right now, it's only getting worse, right? That affordability problem. So my view on this is a little bit different, which is, if I go back to the electronics industry, and let's do a quick comparison here, in that world, costs increase just like they do in the construction industry, right? And that's just a fact of the world, right? Processors get more expensive if they need to put more transistors on them. And we don't need to get deep into the technology, but that happens. The difference is that industry gets more efficient every single year. Because I can tell you, when I worked at Motorola, I was making cell phones. I had to release a product that was better functionality, better looking at a lower cost, or worst case, the same cost, or I was out of business, right? You think about Apple, their phones go up a little bit in cost, but the functionality and the style of that phone is so much better every time. And you either get the same price or a small increase in it, because it is built to meet that point in the industry and what it is from a price point. But what they're doing is getting much more efficient on how they design it, how they build it, and how they're working with their suppliers to get the right costs on it. That unfortunately doesn't happen very well in construction, right? It's, and we can point to the data, right? Again, lots of data sits out there, but at best, construction efficiency has stayed flat over the past 50 years. Most studies would argue that efficiencies have actually gone down. Now, that's partially because of regulatory, right? A lot more regulations are put in when you build a home. You got to do a lot more things than you need to do in the past to meet code. So there's that piece of it. But it's also, there's not a true incentive plan within the construction industry to go drive out the efficiencies like we have to do in the electronics industry. And I say that because it's very much a cost plus model, right? You got kind of vendors that sell into subcontractors. They mark it up, they add their labor, mark it up, sell it to a general contractor. They do the markups, they then kind of sell it off to the developer, right, who's doing this. And so as long as that developer can pencil it, they move it on. And I don't want to say, there's some companies that are actually doing some really good things in efficiencies, but at the end of the day, you can look at the data, it hasn't kept up with the industry. And now going back to the technology piece, which is how do we start getting smarter and better about building so we can go drive some efficiencies in the model at the same time that helps us reduce the cost, even though our material side of things might be going up. And by the way, labor is always going to go up, right? And that's a large percentage of what it costs to build a home or build a building is the labor. And we know that'll always go up. And so I actually look at it and say, I don't think we can control that. I think there'll always be labor will continue to increase. It's happened forever, right? Minimum wages will continue to go up, and the trade labor that we deal with, which is highly skilled, is going to go up. But also, can we get smart about how do we prefab more stuff in a factory, right? It's still people building it, but it's a different model and in a lower cost model. Not to say that we're going to build all on a prefab, but there's a lot of things we can do so that we feed it to the site. There's less being done there, and it's a different model. And then just getting access to data and allowing you to then stop, people focusing on trying to figure out what is the right problem to solve. I mean, the fact is there that 30% of people's time in the construction industry is spent trying to find data, right? What information do I need to make my good decisions? If I can drive that to zero, suddenly those people are now more focused on how do I make sure I stay on schedule? How do I go back and work closer with my suppliers to get better costs? How do I make sure that I have the right number of people on site? That, hey, if my windows are behind getting installed, I don't have my drywall guys standing around because these guys are already there. There's a lot of examples how we can get much more efficient in there, which will allow us to offset some of these increases that you and I see every day.
Right. Yeah. And I think to your point, like, instead of getting so stuck in the mud with the increases and trying to figure out what everything's going to do in terms of the tariffs or the economy or everything like that. I mean, construction is, if you look back, there's always a challenge. There's always a hurdle in front of you. And that's kind of our norm. I mean, that's what we do in construction is we basically we pivot every day. We change. We have to change because, like you said, the windows didn't arrive on time. Oh, crap. Now what do we got to do? Like, so it's like our job is constantly trying to figure that out. So to your point, instead of trying to figure out what's going to happen, it's better to just become more efficient in your own business, correct?
That's the way we think about it. And that's exactly as, going back to your original question, what excites me about kind of what's the most exciting thing I see coming along, it is the technologies that are now supporting this, right? With agentic AI, with, which is kind of the next generation of generative AI, now we're able to start doing that, which again, I say to people all the time, the human in the loop oversight is always going to be there, right? There's a piece of that, but it's getting it so that while people are spending their time, they're doing it in a way to solve the biggest problems that are going to impact schedule and cost, the earliest, because really the surprises are what costs you money, right? It goes back to, if you have extra people on the site and you're not ready for them, you still get a bill for that. Right?
Yeah.
If I can 3 weeks ahead of time, excuse me, know I need to do some rescheduling, I can then save some money, and it's better for my subcontractors as well. People want to work. They want to be doing value add. They don't want to be standing around that, doesn't add value. So I think as we get into this, it's really about what do we do from a technology standpoint to help that, because the data is only getting more, right? With all the tools that are out there, there's just more data thrown at people. And I loved your starting when it was just like, hey, we kind of, shoot from the hip a little bit, right? And there's always some of that has to happen because it is so hard to harness the data in a real-time way and make decisions. And that's where we can, Slate's bringing our value, which we'll talk about, but, there's a lot of other guys in spaces outside of the scheduling side that we really focus on that are also doing it.
Yeah. And what are you seeing? So with all these disruptions that we kind of laid out, what are some of these construction companies doing, especially to stay on schedule and on budget? What are those early things you're seeing? I mean, like I said in the beginning, like some people are still way behind all of this, and they're a little bit hard for them to adopt technology. And a lot of it's because we have an aging, management base that doesn't really adopt it. So what are you seeing some of those early adopters like taking advantage of these things?
Yeah, and it's interesting to me because you kind of get a mix, right? I mean, we deal with a lot of the big construction companies because they have more embraced the data side of things, right? A lot of them now have CTOs, they have data scientists, they're very focused on this, but that's expensive, right? Your smaller shops, that's an expensive set of people to have on board. And so, part of this is the way I think about it is a lot of these tools are being built for some of the bigger companies because they understand them, they can help implement them. You can use their data to really build the models. I mean, because again, the only way you get learnings is from data, right? There's large language models out there for multiple industries, but you only get a large language model in construction when you're getting real construction data into the system. And that's one of the things we've been very focused on is how do we bring the data in? We've created a proprietary large language model, LLM, to go build that out. The hope here is that once we build that with the bigger companies, we can then start going more down market and make this easier for kind of the mid-size and even the smaller companies to implement, even if they don't have a large technology team within their office. And so, the downfall of this is there are so many AI companies out there, right? I joke with people because we kind of got going before ChatGPT made AI the thing that everyone talked about. And so like everything else, there's some AI whitewashing out in the market right now. Like we'll call up somebody we don't know and they say, well, you're the third guy that called me this week and said you have an AI solution that's going to save me money, right? And my comment is, give me a half hour. Like when you actually see what my tool does versus what they're doing, there's some other good tools out there. I'm not picking on all. But I think is we're bringing a value level that's is 5 years in the making versus 1 year in the making that's just using kind of I'll call it a off the shelf LLM to try to go solve some of these problems. And but I do believe, got back to your original question, is I think some of the bigger companies are starting to implement this. They're coming up with some really good ideas on how to use AI to go solve some problems. It really started in risk and safety. But now to where the real dollars are, again, safety is important from a people perspective, and it gets expensive when you do have problems. But, as you start thinking about schedule impacts, cost overruns, that's really where we came in and said, we're gonna put our flag in. And we do that by linking multiple data sets together, right? Because in today's world, as a big contractor uses P6 for the schedule. They use Procore to manage all of the RFIs, all of the work orders. They're using BIM 360 to manage the design side of things. Some are using Microsoft Project. Lots of people are using Excel, and you have all these different sources of data. What is hard to do is start saying, how do I get all this together into one place where I can literally go into my chatbot or into my system, ask a question, and I don't need to know where or what system that data is coming from. It's going out, answering my question, but then using agentic AI to say, not only am I going to tell you what the problem is, here's 3 things that you can do because I've already seen these problems happen before, and these were the best ways to go fix them. Now you're getting to, again, now the human piece comes in because now somebody looks at that and says, all right, I think this is the right way to go. I need to talk to this subcontractor and start working with them. Or from a scheduling perspective, hey, I'm not going to solve this window problem. My materials are going to be late. I'm going to have to go reschedule my sub for windows, but that also then has kind of a stacking effect that I need to do. Getting all that data and information to them at once is where, I see the value coming to them, and you get more efficient as a company to do it.
Yeah, I mean, at least we have the data now, right? I mean, this thinking back, I'm third generation. This thinking back, my grandpa and my dad, there was nothing. Everything was pen and paper. And so at least we have that now to be able to make those decisions. And, as we get more into the technology here, one last thing on the tariffs, like how do you, if you had a crystal ball this thing, how do you feel this is going to play out? Are we looking at years, months? What are you thinking it's going to happen? And then maybe what industries are really going to feel this pinch during this time?
Yeah, it's funny. I was at dinner with a customer last night, and he asked a very similar question on my crystal ball. And I said to him, the only thing I will guarantee you is things will be different next week than this week. And I'll go farther than that, but I mean, that's the reality we're in right now. But I do think it's probably months. Again, I think there'll be iterative pieces along the way that impact it. I think the solution is probably a year, probably even more. They're not going to go away. It's just going to be what's the impact, right? And once companies could start, and this is more on the material side of things, once companies can start to get comfort in what is the real issue out there, is it going to get to 25%, and that's where it's going to stay? And we start to feel confidence in what that's going to mean. Then we can go start redoing our supply chains, right? I can go take stuff out of China and move it to Mexico, right? But what I need to know is that suddenly the tariff on Mexico is not going to go through the roof, and I just wasted my time doing it. Right. Yeah. And so to me, it's like, we have 10 risk mitigation plans in place. And again, I'll go back to the HVAC example because I'm close to it, number one. And if you read Pulte did their earnings report, and they actually called out HVAC specifically because there's such a big component of China in that, right? And so anywhere between 30 and 40% of an HVAC system, we assemble ours in the US, we assemble it here in Texas, but 30% of my components come from China. And so you put 145% on 30% of the materials, well, that just went up almost 40% as a total cost, right? And that is impactful to the build of whether it's a single family home, a multifamily, or to a stadium, right? And so, so I think, the year I say is once the tariffs get sorted out, it's the time then it takes people to start to rebalance their supply chains. And again, this is stuff I've done my whole life in the technology world, and it will happen here. But what I don't want to do is start moving that supply chain around and then realize, wait a minute, that they've changed the game on me again, right? And it's just and so it's a little bit of wait now to see where things settle a little bit. I do think that settle period will come quicker just because we see what's happening in the markets. The second part of your question is who's impacted. It's across the board. I mean, it's, electronics, and I still know plenty of people in that market. They backed off a lot of it on the electronics, but, are they going to come back and put it onto the chip side of things? If they do, that one goes nuts. Automotive, obviously Canada and Mexico, we got to resolve those. We're too dependent on those supply chains. HVAC, my back, some of my background, there's got to be some relief there. There's no way we can pass all that on to customers, because it'll just make the housing more unaffordable than it is today. And that's the way we want to run this place. Yeah,
the tech sector is an interesting one. We're in Folsom, so Intel just released a statement that they're going to be releasing another 20% of their staff here on the Folsom campus. They're already starting to lease out a lot of their campus here in Folsom, which used to be just giant. It used to be what the job you wanted out here in Northern California. And dang, they've had some struggles, and it seems like it's going to continue to do so. So, I mean, I think the good thing about the construction industry is that, we have so much demand. It's about fixing all this crap that we have right now. And that's kind of what we're talking about in the technology piece now. Obviously we kind of talked about why our industry is a little bit, slow to adopt these things. But are you really seeing the shift now? Because, it depends on who I talk to. I get a different answer here. Are you starting to see a shift where it's like, oh crap, I have to do this, so otherwise I'm going to be left in the dust?
Say yes and no. I think there is a little bit of the big guys starting to, as I said earlier. We call it FOMO in the Bay Area. You guys might use that term out. Fear of missing out, right? And so, there is a certain point where these guys say, well, wait a minute, I see other people leveraging this technology. And if I leverage that as well, then I can get the same benefits. Otherwise, I start falling behind. And so I think we're starting to see some of that again in the bigger players right now. Yeah. And I don't want to minimize. There's some mid-tier guys that are doing some pretty impressive stuff as well. I mean, but on the larger companies, I think they are realizing there has to be. If you look at, use a company like Suffolk out of the Boston area, right? They created a venture fund. They're investing in startups to go, solve the problems that they see. And if you listen to their CEO, who's a very smart guy in the industry, right? They are out there talking about there's not enough labor. So how do we use technology to help on the labor and material supply chain is one of the biggest issues we have. How do we use technology to go resolve some of this? And so I think you're starting to see that. I mean, DPR has an investment fund. So you're starting to see a lot of the bigger construction companies actually raise a fund so they can invest in startups. And the good news with them is they have all the data. Right. So if you connect and get invested in that, one, that you get access to some data. And number two is they're actually helping you get on your initial projects. And so I actually think you're starting to see more and more of that across the big companies who have money to go invest, which will help the industry, get better companies in quicker than they did in the past, where, a tech startup would get funded out of Silicon Valley. They try to go in, talk to 30 different general contractors, finally get lucky with one of them. And then they'd say, well, let's wait till a few buildings are built, and we'll talk to you about the next one. And so I think there'll be more rapid adoption because of the way, people are thinking about it with venture funds inside of the construction industry. And you got brick and mortar and some other just standalone funds that are doing some of this. Yeah. So I do think we're going to see the adoption faster. Is it going to be, overnight? I wish it was, because then my company would go through the roof, but it's still a grind getting in there. And it's, for us, it's you get in there, you say, hey, let's prove it. Let's do a pilot with a project. Okay, let's move that to 3 projects, and then continue to kind of move up and try to get across the enterprise. But it's still slow to adopt compared to some other industries, as you probably know.
And let's speak to those small, medium-sized companies. A lot of in the remodeling sector, especially. And talking to a lot of those folks, they're adding, little pieces here or there. I think their problem is it's kind of like too much at one time, right? So they're just kind of paralysis by analysis, right? It's like, which tool do I use? And some of them have said like, hey, I have 3 different software sitting on my shelf that I have not started using yet. So what would you say to them? What's a good starting point? To figure out, hey, what integrates well together, what's going to work with our business, what's a good starting point for them?
Yeah, and Jeremy, you might know, I used to, as part of Onyx, we had Renew, which was a renovations company. So I spent a good amount of time. I was, Steve DeLeon, who's CEO over there, and I knew each other well. And so, we spent a lot of time on that, because you're 100% right? Trying to implement this. And most of that work is field work, every project you go into is a little bit different, right? It's like, what's the level of work you're going to do there, and trying to find lightweight tools, because, you're getting labor in the market that needs to be able to have a simple way to do it. So, my view on those is find 1 or 2 packages that are lightweight. You don't need some. I tell people all the time, what we did at Slate, and originally before I got there, they were trying to go in and be almost a full ERP implementation, right? We were going to go and say, hey, we can take over P6, we can take over these pieces. And my answer was, we will never get a deal done, right? Because P6 has been around forever. It's got some really good parts to it. What we can do is sit on top of a lot of these platforms. So if you look at the renovations, a lot of people use Sage in that market, or they're using Microsoft Project. To be fair, there are tools out there that can ingest that data. Are you ahead or behind on, if you're doing multifamily renovations, the renovations, right? And give you some pretty simple insights without having to do a heavy lift to put it in. And I think that is where a lot of people need to start, because once you get it overly complicated, people don't use it. I mean, it's kind of that simple in my mind.
Yeah, that's definitely true. We talked a little bit about AI, and obviously AI is definitely the wave of the future. How are some guys using it, especially with the price and supply fluctuations? How are they best implementing that right now in their businesses?
Yeah, so I'll give you some examples from my world, just because I think it's they're real world ones. I mean, we have a couple tools inside of Slate that we bring to market. One of them is what we call Slate Generate. It's generative AI that uses computational design. So you rather than somebody going in having to draw up let's go with a data center, right? That's kind of a bigger example, but one of our customers is a data center where you can go in, instead of having to draw that up, hand it off to an estimator. The estimator then has to do his estimates on all the materials that go into it, hand it off to a scheduler. That scheduler then has to try to figure out what the schedule is to go build that thing. And then you go back to the customer and say, here's what it looks like. Normally it goes back and forth a few times, right? They push back and say, well, what if we did X? What if we had less power coming in, or we had less servers inside of that? So what do? You go back to the design, you redo the design, you hand it over to the scheduler, you hand it over to the estimator, and you go through those cycles. Slate Generate really comes up and says, I understand how you've built these in the past, right? I can go through your spec sheets and understand how to build a data center, right? And again, this is just data it can get through very quickly. And then it can start saying, what are the parameters? How much power do you need coming into the building? How much compute? How much storage? All these parameters that really came from the brain of the people that were doing those data center designs, but they put them into, more of a menu-driven opportunity where you pick, hey, for civil, we need to do these, this is the inputs. For mechanical, these are the inputs, electrical. And after they're done with that, we can go auto-generate their design, right? So then we can come back and say, this is what that design looks like. I can then go out to their ERP system, get their cost, because now I've built material, tell them what the estimate on that would be. And then I can say, hey, I've looked at projects and how you've built them over the past. I can actually come back and say, this is what your schedule is. And by the way, this is the highest risk areas in that schedule very quickly. So now we're talking an hour versus weeks. Right. And then you hand it to the customer. He comes back and says, guess what? Let's take down the amount of compute we need in there. This is too expensive. That next hour, I can hand them back that new update. Right. This is where you start seeing those savings. And again, it's taking, work that redrafting a data center to have a little bit more isn't the most interesting work in the world. And it's kind of pawned off a lot of times to offshore anyways. Yeah. For us, it's all about how do we go do those pieces right? Because really what we want to get to is a quicker time to get that done and then be able to hand it off to production. The interesting piece then comes when you start linking these pieces together. So now you load P6 with the schedule. You load up your BIM 360 with the design. Your cost obviously came from your ERP because your sourcing team is getting those. But now as you're building it, you start learning. Hey, what went well in that design? What went badly in that design? You can now take those lessons learned real time and feed them back into your computational design piece of this. So next time you go in and they say, okay, now we're going to design the next data center out in Kansas, you learned from that last one you built. And so now you're feeding that back into the design piece of it. This is where truly the machine learning comes into play. And, now we're talking about, again, taking things that are just a little bit mind numbing from a work perspective and turning it into, a design perspective that AI is driving, and then the machine learning is feeding back and getting better and better. Right. So that's how I think about kind of the real benefits of it. And then on the back end of it, again, I'll use Slate examples because I love to pitch my product. Blessed, it's a real life example of it. But we have something called Progress, where now somebody can go in and they can literally look at what's been done in a room from a MEP perspective on a handheld. We download the BIM model. They can just touch what's done. Now I upload and I have their progress reporting done. Right. I can also then feed that back into their insights and say, hey, you're behind here, you're ahead here, you're missing some materials, and start giving them insights and recommendations to fix that. And I can take that and feed it all the way back into their original computational design. Because if they're behind, next time I build that schedule, I actually want the schedule to be better than it was the last time. So you start being able to link these pieces together and get those learnings. And we do that right. And it just starts getting, how do we stay on schedule? It starts to see the problems earlier. It goes back to what we talked about earlier. Yeah. If I need to reschedule subcontractors, I'm rescheduling them. And what gets very, interesting to me, maybe I geek out on this stuff a little bit, but is that, we're also bringing in things like weather, right? So if I know you're going to install Windows, when I'm loading your data, my language model actually flags all the trades that can be impacted by weather. So if I see there's going to be 60 mile per hour winds or 50 mile per hour winds on that building next week, I'm actually going to tell you you're not going to hang your windows, or there's an X% probability that you're not going to be able to do that trade. So either try to pull it in or make sure you're rescheduling the other trades behind it, because you're going to have issues doing that. And that's where you can start pulling in the other pieces where, again, can people figure this out? They can. But when people walk into the building and have 1,000 problems in front of them every day, it's like, what are the most important ones for me to fix today? And then what they normally can't get to is like, what's going to save me next week and for the next month? And that's what we're really trying to do is say, hey, when you walk in today, here's your biggest 5 things to do. If you're a field person, go address these. If you're a scheduling person, and this is where we kind of do a persona based, this is what you need to focus on. These are your issues kind of going out, even to the point of, you have 5 RFIs open on that window, that window system. It normally takes you 5 days to close an RFI, and you're supposed to install in 6 days. Well, you better get on top of those things, or you better start thinking about you're going to redo this. And again, it's all stuff people could figure out, but they need to go to about 3 different data sources to pull that information together.
Yeah, and I think that's what I hear a lot about our industry is that's the stressful piece, is that piece of walking in your office and having 5 different fires in front of you got to put out, right?
And most of them are coming via email.
Yeah.
Or text or whatever, right? You're sitting there trying to, I have 3 different text systems and an email. Yeah. It's just like, which one of these am I focused on?
Yeah. Or the worst is a text in all caps, right? It's like, but it's true. It's like, there's so many things that, obviously our job is never the same every day, which is for a lot of people, that's great. But for a lot of other people, that the lack of predictability and the stress that comes from other angles saying like, they're mad because you're not on schedule. And it's difficult. It does feel like you're drinking out of a fire hose sometimes. So, having that AI piece to be able to help guide you, like you said, here are your top 3 things today that you really need to focus on. Dang, it makes me excited about becoming more efficient. Like you said, how can we bring some costs down? I'm not worried about the people aspect of losing people. We need people in our industry.
Yeah, so, exactly. It's exactly right.
I've never seen that as an issue. Like, crap, let's replace, that 10 to 20% delta that we need with AI. That makes a lot of sense to me. But where do you?
Well, I think the important part to me also, sorry to interrupt you, is it also becomes you skill these people up better, right? Because you got a lot of people that are out there just doing stuff. Again, a guy that has to redo the estimate for the 5th time, or a person in the field is doing rework for the 3rd time because it wasn't communicated to him that there was a revision on the windows. Nobody likes to do that work. That's they want to be doing the work that's adding value. I think it's just, at least I know a lot of people, and inherently people want to work, and they want to work in things that add value. When it's like, all right, go replace this window for the 3rd time, it's no value add. It's just people don't like to do that. So skill up the people to do those things that are really important to make sure we're getting more efficient, and instead of being negative efficiency in the industry, moving it to positive efficiency in the industry. I think people are happier workers as well. And then to your point, we can't get the labor we need today. So let's go get these guys, skill them up better, which means they get a better salary. They're able to, provide a better life for their families. That's the stuff that gets me excited. And I'm the exact opposite of most people, which is this is bad for an industry. I'm like, this is like, it gives people better skill sets to go attack it in an industry where we can't get the labor we need already.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think it's what our industry needs to close the gap. So I don't see any other way around it for us, especially when you look at our aging industry and our lack of new blood in the industry, especially with young folks. It's still they're not pouring in, man. So we got to figure it out. So another crystal ball moment on the AI side, where you see it 5 to 10 years in our construction industry.
Yeah, so I continue to believe that kind of this computational design will become more and more important, right? So again, the architects who come up with these, I don't know, depending who you talk to, great ideas or crazy ideas, could probably use the term depending on what building you're looking at a certain time. Those people are always going to be the guys out there on the forefront doing the design. But the drawing of a lot of these subcomponents and those things, I think, can get automated very quickly. So again, let's focus our time on the things that we can't automate. That's, again, probably the stuff that's a higher paying area. Because I do think a lot of what we see in these buildings, whether it's multifamily, whether it's data centers, power, a lot of this stuff can be operationalized and put into, as I said, computational design. So I think that's a big piece where AI will set some value. I do also think we're going to get, and it's probably not the 5 years, it's probably the couple of years where, there's cameras now that can do a lot of this where, people have cameras on sites, they can find safety risks, they can find, issues of materials that are sitting there by flying a drone over. There's some nice technologies. They're not robust enough right now where people kind of will put all their money into that basket right now. But what progress that I talked about, I mean, when I started this, it was like, hey, I just want to walk in with a pair of goggles. I can look in that room. It'll immediately take what I see through the goggles or a camera and flash it against what the BIM 360 model is and come back and say, yes, this room's done. You're on time. All is good. Or no, you need to get this person down, and start seeing failures, right? To me, one of the biggest things, and we see more and more of this, is the warranty side. So one of the things that we've done with Slate is now we get the warranty data. There's Builder, there's other systems that hold that. But not only are we looking and saying, hey, what's impacted the project in the past on the build side of it, but what are those things that then happen to warranty, and start giving the feedback while those trades are going on. So when somebody's going in and they're doing a certain task within mechanical, they are actually in there saying, hey, you need to go do this inspection, or hey, verify this happened, because we've seen that in the warranty. And we've done this with customers now, where we've said, give us 10 old projects. Let us get all your lessons learned from your 10 old projects. And now that first project that we're using Slate with, it's not like I have to go learn. I already learned from those projects that had their issues. Now I start layering that in on top of it. And so day one on the new projects, I'm already able to give them some lessons learned to build those in, and pulling that warranty piece in, so that it's not just, hey, did my schedule optimize, which is interesting. And a lot of us do that. But let's start looking at what are those cost points, because, warranty and rework is such a big number to these projects. Again, it goes back to, if on a home I had zero warranty and zero rework, you're probably 5 or 10% lower cost than that house day one. And so how do we get the AI to give you that? Because right now, the guys doing your warranty work aren't going back and saying, hey, project team, here's a few ideas. Why don't you go do those? Because it's just the value chain's not set up that way. So I think there's a lot of places like that where we can start tying these disparate pieces of data that today don't get brought together, bring them together, and then taking it to that next layer of technology, which is, bringing in all the materials, right? How do I get it so I can start looking and knowing, they call it 4D, then 5D and BIM, right? Start bringing those pieces in, where now I'm using AI to start really diving into the supply chain from the materials perspective as well.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Now, this other piece, you kind of mentioned a couple of this data fragmentation. It's long been an issue in our industry. What are the risks of continuing to operate in these silos, and how can centralizing data change the game for us?
So I think the silos do cause friction, right? And it goes back to the wasted time of people trying to find data, and if they don't find it, then they have to make decisions without the data. And so, that is where, the first thing we do from a data standpoint is, if your silos are schedule, let's call it P6, Procore, BIM 360, the first thing that Slate can do is we can ingest all that data, right? So literally from InSlate, you can log into those systems for that project. It brings all the data in. It then links the data together. So we call this our auto linking. This is our secret sauce, right? So next thing, very quickly, I can start saying, how does that RFI miss impact my schedule? Or how does that cost increase on this area impact my overall budget? Because what we're trying to do is bring those pieces together. And as I said, when I came to Slate, we were trying to go in and say, hey, just use us as your ERP. We can do your schedule. We can do your forms for RFIs. We can do your forms for labor, and do all these pieces. But people are very ingrained, for good reason, in the tools that they have, because it's hard to move. And I told people, as a startup, if I walk in the door and say, I want to do a new implementation of your schedule, that conversation was probably over at that point with any major customer. And so our point was, let us sit on top. We're not a heavy implementation. Once, and it takes AI's learning, right? So we have a very good language model that can get data linked together. But as you probably know, within every general contractor, they have a little bit of different lingo. And so we link one project together, and it does pretty well. It might be 75, 80% of the links work. And then you say, okay, what data couldn't it link? And then you go in and you teach it, right? And then once you teach it on that first project, we're up in the mid 90s on the second project, right? Because very quickly it says, hey, I understand the industry side of it. Now I just need to kind of get that little bit of learning on your side of it. And then once you have that data together, literally you're in a chatbot right now. And this is where the Ingenic AI comes into play. And you say, what revision of my Windows am I on? Revision 13.2. What are the costs of those windows? This is your cost. When are they going to be installed? This is date. Are there any open RFIs? Yes, these are the open RFIs. Do you want to email them to the person that owns them? Yes, emails off goes to those guys. the person doing that doesn't need to know, well, I wanted to understand the cost, I needed to go to SAP. I wanted to understand whether open RFIs, I had to go to Procore. Where's the schedule and what's the date of the install? I go to P6. They're just in one system being able to ask questions. And just like all of our friends who use ChatGPT, the next question you ask builds off your last one. Right. So if you say, hey, how many open RFIs are there? There's 5 of them. Here they are. What's the most impactful? Here's the answer to that. What is my normal longest time to close an RFI? And all that it can go do with the AI, where you're not having to sit there and understand where to go get it. And that's where the 30% of people's time is being wasted on finding data goes away. And now, because you have the data at your fingertips, you're making smarter, better decisions, right? And that's how we go get efficiencies.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Kind of, we talked a little bit about this, but, these AI-driven platforms, what can companies do to make an impact over the next 12 to 18 months in their business? Where would you recommend they go? I mean, obviously Slate's a good place to start to just get a recommendation. But, I think a lot of the problem I see is just starting. How can we start? Where do we start?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I mean, there's plenty of people out there that are offering all the time, hey, we can get you implemented. I think part of it, and it was interesting in your opening, right? Finding trusted people who understand it is pretty important. There's plenty of databases you can go out there and find, hey, what are the different tools that solve a problem? Now they're going to be they're going to list 20 of them. Okay, with those 20, some of them are enterprise, some of them are smaller. You can probably limit it down. So I do think that there's a bunch of ways you can go find it, but getting trusted advisors that can kind of help you is pretty important. I would also say, and our CTO is he's an animal in the AI. I joke with people, my biggest problem with him is I got to keep him off speaker panels because everyone wants them to come talk about AI in construction or AI in general just because of his background. But it's at the end of the day, there are a lot of people who make big promises that we're going to solve all your problems day one. It's not going to happen. Right. You got to go in, as I said, even for us, we go in, we do that first run of a project. We got to teach the model some, right. And there's kind of an iterative process to get better and better. And so I think people need to understand that as they get into implementing tools within AI. It's not just, hey, day one, everything's going to be perfect. And I had a very robust discussion at dinner the other night with somebody, a general contractor. And her point to me was, at the end of the day, we understand at kind of the technology level that because you're using AI doesn't mean everything's perfect. Right? It's not 100% right. It's using past to predict the future, right? And it gets better and better. But she's like, what you're going to see is on the project side, they're always looking for the one problem, right? So you give them 20 recommendations, 19 of them are perfect and show a lot of value. You're probably not going to hear about those. What you're going to hear about is the one that was wrong. And that's where it's almost a different mindset at companies is, you can't go in thinking everything's going to just be perfect day one. You got to go in saying, I'm going to use this as a human in the loop, that it's going to come back. It's going to say, here's what the insight is. Here's what the problem is. I'm going to make you 3 recommendations. And then you need to kind of look at those and understand them. Once you teach the tool and you say, hey, this is the best way to solve that, and it actually goes and solves it, the tool says, okay, you said to do this. I see that it worked. Next time, it'll come back and make that your only recommendation. And you can then get to a point where those learnings happen. But as you know, then there's going to be 15 different problems in the next project that it didn't see before. And so there's always kind of that piece it brings in. So I kind of skirted around on a few different topics there, but I do think it's important just as people get in this to understand, every tool is a learning tool. They get better and better the more they do, but there's still a little bit of project or company specific pieces that need to come into play. And having that mindset going into it's going to be very important, or you end up with people that are disappointed because they said, hey, I got rid of 10 people because they told me that I had not need to do scheduling and estimating for, the first week. And, that was a bad idea. Right.
And the last piece that I hear a lot of is regulations and compliance standards. Obviously, they're rapidly changing all the time and quicker, right? So there's more coming at us. How can technology help with that piece? Because that's another one where we don't have time to know all this stuff, right? So how can technology help us?
Yeah, and I think the good news there is, more and more municipalities are getting digitized, right? In the past, this was harder, right? Because you'd go I'd build a deck in Maine 20 years ago, and I had to go into the office and get a piece of paper that told me what code was, right? And now you're able to, at least in the bigger municipalities, be able to manage that, as well as kind of government ones. And so, the good news about AI is you can go out and pulse that every night, right? You can come back and start saying, hey, here's new regulatory. And within tools, you can start then highlighting it, which is, hey, this building was designed to X. There's new regulations coming down the pipe. You need to do, you need to be aware of this as your building's selling. So I think the good news on it, to your point, is there's so much data out there. It's hard for people to keep up a lot of times. Like a new code ref comes out. What AI can do is start looking and saying, what has changed in the code, and then be able to come back to your specific project and say, hey, these are areas that you need to be aware of as we go into this project. And right. Again, what AI does to me in a lot of cases is it says, I'm taking sets of data that are just too big for humans to get through, and have to do that on kind of a monthly or quarterly basis, and automating it so I can get through all that data and then come back and give you, highlights on what the problems are going to be. And then, as you say, as you get to more agentic AI, not only highlight the problem, but then start bringing some recommendations to the table.
Yeah, that makes total sense. No, I appreciate you being here, Trevor. This has been a wealth of information. If people want to learn more about Slate, connect with you, how do they go about doing so?
Yep, best way, slate.ai is the website out there. We got a great set of folks that keep their eye on that. Our process is pretty simple. We love to get on. Demos of the tool, and love folks out there. I mean, we're doing some great stuff that we can help with, and we'd love to talk to people about it.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for being here.
Great. Thanks.
Yep. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us on another episode of Construction Executives Live. We'll see you in a couple weeks for our next show. Thank you so much. Bye.
You've been listening to In the Zone and Construction Executives Live with Jeremy Owens. Be sure to subscribe to In the Zone and stay in the know with the best minds in the construction industry. To nominate an innovator or change maker in the construction industry, connect with your management peers and stay up to date with construction industry news. Be sure to visit usconstructionzone.com.